Thank you so much for being here today and allowing me to be here, and Aspect Autism for the invitation. This is the farthest I've been from home, and I don't know if I want to come back. I feel really welcomed here. So I'm going to talk about Compass, as we mentioned, and what's different about Compass is instead of us working directly with the children, we're working with the adults during the school day who have the most frequent interactions with the children. It builds on collaboration, mutual support. What I really love is when there's a conference and the presentations have a theme and it's consistent, so we're not countering each other, and it really builds on what Judy was saying, what Barry was saying, the goals of the CRC, and that's wonderful. It's based on a family-centered approach, and we could also say teacher-centered, in that we're trying to really empower the people who are tasked with those difficult challenges of ensuring that every child with autism, regardless of severity, is benefiting from their educational program. It doesn't matter how well I might work with the child individually, it's how well the people who have those most frequent interactions. And also, we really want to build up the supports around the child. We've heard about that today with the puzzle pieces and how we do this in a systemic fashion. We also want to think about what are we working on today that's going to build skills to have important quality of life outcomes. So teaching a young child today how to imitate could then lead that child to have peer interactions and then friendships later on down the road. Or how to make choices can lead to that ability to have self-determination and making adequate, informed choices for themselves later on in adulthood. So what we work on today needs to have that link to adulthood. And then outcomes-based monitoring. I'll talk a little bit about the goal attainment scale approach today and how we've used that. And then performance feedback and problem solving. At the outset, we have very clear measurable goals that don't change, but what changes are our teaching plans and how the child is responding to those goals. So what I heard, and we didn't really get together last night and decide what we were going to say because there's just such neat, synchronicity going on here. But the evidence-based practice in psychology framework is what really brings together these things we've been talking about: the evidence-based practice, the characteristics of the child, their strengths, their challenges, and then also the skills of the teachers or the clinicians. It's how those come together, and where they overlap is that clinical decision making that we need to really work on. Because we know one thing for sure with autism research today is not every single evidence-based practice works for every single child. We have to personalize and individualize. So today's presentation as the workshop, I'm going to get more at the mechanics of Compass. Tomorrow, I didn't want to have a lot of overlap between that and my presentation tomorrow. But this graph shows some of the results of our latest study with Compass. And there are 3 columns there. The green column represents the outcomes, educational outcomes of children who did not receive Compass, but whose teachers received some online training. And then the blue represents those who received Compass and then face-to-face teacher coaching. And then the kind of orange, when they're yellow, was more, those are teachers who received the same face-to-face consultation, but web-based coaching. And what we found was that all children made progress. The children in that comparison control condition, they made significant progress, but the children who received Compass made about twice as much progress on their IEP goals. And what we were excited about was the web-based group was equally effective to the face-to-face group. In Kentucky, where I'm from, Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia, we have a lot of families that are, or schools that are kind of, just situated far from cities, far from autism expertise, and if we can find alternative ways to meet those needs and have evidence-informed choices to make, that's what we're shooting for. Okay, so we've heard a lot about working from strengths and well-being. And what we think about and what kind of guides Compass is this idea about the balance between challenges and supports. Challenges can come from the characteristics of autism, personal challenges, environmental challenges. If we have to consider those in the face of the skill that we're trying to teach and how those might dampen or hinder skill development. On the other side of that, we want to make sure that we're building more into supports. So the personal supports can be the strengths, the interests of the person, the child, and then environmental supports, which is basically our teaching plans. And so today's presentation, I'm going to go through these 3 main steps. Step 1 is when we gather some functional assessment about the child. And I'm going to actually use a case study, and I have some videos to show you. Step 2 is the actual consultation. Now, our consultation has 2 steps. One is the initial face-to-face Compass consultation that involves the parent and the teacher. And then the other step is the follow-up work that we do with the teacher in the implementation of the teaching plans. Parents are invited. We don't require them to come because sometimes it's difficult to be able to take time away from work, but we always send follow-up descriptions about what happened and next steps before the next coaching session. So I'm going to go through each of those more individually. So we want to have information beforehand if we can. A lot of our students or children have lots of prior psychological assessments where we can get some information about the child's level of communication, social skills, learning skills. We focus a lot on that ability to start a task independently, work to completion, understand when finished, being able to communicate when finished, and then other areas. And for the example here, his listed here as Joey, but I also have him in here as Anthony. It's a pseudonym, and I didn't keep him consistent throughout. But anyway, you'll see Joey on the left-hand side. That's some of the information that we gathered about him. And I didn't pick our easiest kid to show you. I picked a child that really required a lot of decision-making and discussion. Average scores for IQ are between 85 and 115. His was 50, so significantly below average with intellectual functioning, language skills, and adaptive skills. But he also had high externalizing problem behaviors, and then he had moderate to severe autism overall. So in this slide, this is my research assistant working with him because for the research studies we have to do some of the gold standard assessments to say that in Eastern Kentucky, this is what we're calling autism, and that's the same as New York City. So this is part of the ADOS that you might recognize. And she's doing the early imitation task with him. So just notice this and think about, well, what were some of his challenges and what were some strengths that you saw here? And it's just a short video. He had some difficulty imitating with objects, but when it was something more familiar, he was able to do that, and he actually was able to use a block like a replacement item that didn't look like a cup and pretend to drink with that. So anyway, we gather information ahead of time, and then during the consultation, we have this protocol that we go through. We want to make sure that we cover these main areas. First of all, we have a training packet that includes an explanation of what outcomes we're expecting from Compass, as well as an overview of best practices. Then we talk about our Compass profile, which I understand that you have something similar here, your mapping approach, where it's I think consistent with what we're trying to do here. And I have some very specific, I actually have Joey's forms on here to show you just the main areas that we cover and we use for the discussion. This is probably the most critical piece. Well, there's 3 critical pieces, but the first critical piece, and it's that sharing of information from the parent perspective and the teacher perspective together that helps us then make sure that we get the right goals. We target the right goals, and then we develop the teaching plans. And this portion lasts about 45 minutes to an hour. And then we generate 3 teaching objectives that we want to make sure are measurable. This actually takes some time. This part of it is really deciding what are the specific social skill goal we're going to work on, or communication skill, or that independent learning work skill. And then we develop our teaching plans. For best practices, this was a book written in 2001, and it brought together various autism intervention researchers. This is for younger children between 3 and 8, and who had diverse opinions and theoretical backgrounds about autism interventions, and made them kind of come together and say, okay, what should a good practice program look like? And so we want to make sure that we're addressing social skills, communication skills, play skills, and that ability to be flexible and to be able to be motivated, motivation systems, of course, cognitive, academic skills, and then behaviors that are the foundation to more independence and less or more inclusive classrooms. So for Joey, these were the concerns that his parents, his mom and his teacher had described in the Compass forms. We send those out in advance, we get them back, and we bring them together where we have the parent concerns on one side, the teacher concerns on the other side, and we review that information. That's what we use for that discussion with the Compass profile during the consultation. And what his teacher wrote and how she described it was she wanted to see him have more normalized peer play, also to move away from the repetitive play and being able to interact with other children. Communicating, mainly being able to express himself without hurting himself or hurting others, and then learning skills to be able to do things without adult prompting, to be able to complete things independently, and to control his temper. So here's an example, and I'm going to walk through each one of these briefly, but to give you an idea of the breadth of information that we gather. And on the first one here, we talk about his likes and preferences and his strengths. And we share, what does the teacher see, what does the caregiver see, and we get more information as we're going through this. We also talk about strengths and abilities. And we want to make sure, and I've heard this earlier today, that when we identify the strengths and abilities, that we're using those personal supports in those teaching plans, that we're deliberately targeting those and making sure they're part of it. We also talk about frustrations and fears. And one thing that was coming up as a thing was that when Joey was denied a want, when he was not allowed on his own to change his schedule, so he understood his schedule, and but he didn't have those negotiation skills. When he didn't understand a task, those were times when we might see aggression. And his mom talked about how it was hard to read him, and then we discussed fears. And then the second one, I think it's cut up, it's up there, personal management, adaptive skills, so we review that information, and again, looking for areas of overlap, areas of differences. There might be areas of differences because home and school are different places. And what I really I appreciate when we share this information is, in Joey's example, his mother essentially never went outside. She just went to the grocery store, and she might go to church, but didn't do anything else because of behavioral concerns. Problem behaviors, there were a number of those that were, again, consistent. So this, kind of story is developing about Joey, and we're definitely going to have to, as we address our skills, make sure that we're showing the link between our teaching plans and how that's going to reduce problem behavior. And the way that we do this is, probably a lot of you have seen this notion of this picture of an iceberg. Can you raise your hand if you've seen this kind of thing before? Oh, good. Okay. So we explained to the teacher and the teaching assistant and parent about these are just symptoms. We have to understand below the iceberg, what are the contributors to the aggression? And then that's where we need to teach and identify those pro-social replacement skills. And that's where I think we have the most difficult time with a lot of our students who have behavioral issues, is understanding those right replacement skills. What's really going to get at the meat of this. We also talk about social skills and spend a lot of time here, and you can't really see this very well, but we talk about how does the child interact with adults and interact with other children. The S's mean strength, the W's are weaknesses, and for his play skills, that one little small piece on the top there, I just pasted in there. Essentially Joey manipulates objects and would put things in his mouth and engaged in isolated play. So it kind of gives us a sense developmentally where he's at with his play. But what also I circled down here that was standing out, because we know we're wanting to hit a social skill in here, was he does do some imitation, mostly with adults, but not so much with children. And so we're starting to think, well, maybe this can somehow become one of those early social skills we can work on with him. Next, we review communication skills. And what we really want to know here is how they communicate all these various messages. And for Joey, it was through physical means. Joey's nonverbal, and he would take people to the objects he wants or brings the objects to the people. And but for refusals, you start to, again, get a picture here. He yells and hits and scratches. Well, he yells and hits and scratches to say, go away, I don't want to, I want to be finished. But also when he's in pain. So how do we discriminate when he's in pain, when he's doing that, versus when he doesn't want to do the activity? Right? That's a common problem that we all have. And confusion, when he's confused about something, we see that behavior. So we're trying to help understand this child who's nonverbal from his perspective, and helping the whole team, have that common perception there. And then finally we talk about sensory challenges and actually sensory supports too, but for him you can see he had a lot of issues with taste of things. And we, while we're talking about this, again, we're thinking about these can be environmental challenges. So we want to make sure that as we're teaching new skills, we're considering these aspects. The environmental challenges there on the left, we don't really make a list of these when we're doing the consultation, but as the consultant, I'm kind of making a mental note of these things that we want to make sure to address in the teaching plan. And then environmental supports. And he had a lot of, quite a number. His teacher actually had quite a lot of training in autism, but what she talked about was how to transfer the information she knows to her teaching assistants. There just wasn't time in the day to do that, and so that was an environmental challenge that we needed to consider. So that's essentially what happens during the part B here of the consultation in step 2. And then now we have to prioritize our parent and teacher concerns, and that leads to the goals. And we're thinking about what skills can we work on today that's going to have that broader quality of life impact down the road, but also they're going to be pivotal. So if we could teach him, for example, to initiate, then think about how important that skill of initiation is for their learning down the road. For letting people know if he's in pain, or for getting his needs met with a variety of different people. And that's the things that we're keeping in the back of our mind as we're going through this. So here are Joey's goals. We talked about him learning to start and complete an independent task without aggression. Because it seems like that was when a lot of it was happening, was when the teachers were trying to direct him to do something. Also to imitate adult play activities, and then to make at least 10 different requests per day independently. And then you'll see in our teaching plan form, you see the balance in there. And so what we would do is take the actual goal that we want to work on, and we think, okay, based on the conversation we just had, what are his particular personal challenges that are going to make it difficult for him to learn this skill? What are the environmental challenges that are going to make it difficult? What are the personal supports? And then finally our environmental supports is the teaching plan. And then we break that down more. We talk about a specific teaching plan. What materials do we need? We get very specific. Who's going to teach it, where, when, and then how are we going to collect data? So this is Joey's teaching plan. So for the skill of imitating adult play activities, we identified that joint attention was a problem that would make it hard for him to learn this, because if you can't get his attention, then he's not going to be as engaged. He may not necessarily do it just to please others, so we have to think about that. And then there's our many objects he's just not motivated to interact with. Environmental challenges, he was in an integrated setting. You'll see it's a very loud classroom with lots of other students, lots of physical distractions, lots of noise in the environment. And also what we didn't discuss, but his parents were going through a separation and there was a lot of stress at home. And we had to think about that too, that he doesn't have a way to let us know that, but sleeping had been disrupted. And so he might be coming to school and not feeling fully rested and ready to learn. Personal supports. He liked animals. He liked small objects he could hold in his hands. He had, his teacher felt his receptive language was much better than his expressive language. He could imitate some object or some actions with objects that you saw in that earlier video. And he likes praise and hugs. And then environmental support. So we really tried to reinforce that, with the parent and the teacher, that you both want the same things, that we're working towards the same goals together, and that we've got sociable peers here in this classroom that we might even be able to use as part of our teaching plan. And I won't go through each one of these items independently, but just to give you a sense of what our teaching plans look like, is we talked about, we did refer the teacher to some online resources of some evidence-based practices, and we thought, well, which ones make most sense for teaching imitation? So discrete trial training, prompting, and peer-mediated instruction to hopefully get peers in there. We talked about assembling objects that Anthony likes, or Joey likes, that would keep his attention. How to cue him to get his attention and maintain his attention. And number 3 here, we have be creative and try out different things. That's why I enjoyed Barry's presentation so much, because we have to be creative. Because again, not every evidence-based practice, there's so much decision-making that has to happen. And we have to be thinking about, again, how we individualize and personalize this, and that comes from the creativity. Then we talked about, how to cue him, how to really avoid physical prompting as much as possible to start. If he had a hard time giving up a preferred object, maybe we start with 2 of the same objects, so the teacher would make, cue him and make action with the object, and then ask him to do it, so he doesn't have to give it up, because that turn taking is a whole other skill that we might have to work on. And then we talked about maybe avoiding things that spin and twirl, and things that have wings, because those seem to get his attention, and he'd have a hard time giving that up. And then generalizing verbal cues to phrases and being able to use gestures, and then with different people being involved. And then hopefully with peers. So again, we're thinking about those stepping stones. So now we're moving to the coaching sessions and the coaching protocol. So this all happened during that first 3-hour meeting. We didn't get always through every single teaching plan for all 3 skills. Sometimes we had to come back during the first coaching session to complete the teaching plan. And so our coaching protocol, basically what we would do is have the teacher instruct the child on the skill, and then we would score the goal attainment scale that I'll show you in a little bit what that was. And then we have a short interview with the teacher about what worked well, what wasn't working so well, and we would make, if necessary, modifications to the teaching plan. We also talked about how often the skill was taught, if we weren't seeing much progress, but we thought the teaching plan was sound when we talk about do we need to increase the frequency of teaching. But you'll notice one of the decisions we made was to not use those small little animals anymore, especially the birds, because he did kind of perseverate on that, and so she changed the activities. But you could see that he had no trouble giving up the object. He really was understanding the my turn, your turn. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, the birds. this last video, this is his, and this one here, this was the last one the teacher provided to us. And so he's sitting on the chair there, and we'll watch this.
Salad. I do want... Scraping on David! No! No, David. I'm working very hard on my things.
So that was really, I don't think the teacher would have thought he would be able to do this at the end of the year. In fact, she told us that she thought that the goals we set were too high. And actually, we've, in our 2 studies, have worked with, I think 44 different teachers. And she was the first teacher to tell us that after the consultation, that the goals were too high and she wanted to change them. And we ended up doing that for her, but we said, can we still keep the goals for the study the way that we originally wrote them? And she agreed to that. And he ended up meeting his goals. And so let me explain this, how we monitored outcomes. And the goal attainment scale approach isn't meant to replace weekly data collection. It just gives us that kind of big picture, are we headed in the right direction? And at the -2 level is where all the children who were receiving the consultation started. They were at baseline. And where we wanted them to be by the end of the school year, which was 9 months for us, would be at that 0 level. And I know this doesn't really make sense going from -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. They started this in the 70s, and I just kept this part consistent. But anyway, 0 is where we want him to be at the end of the school year. And +1 and +2 would be if he exceeded the goals, which, as you can see, he actually did. And the social skill we were just talking about is the one in the red line. And the thing that we learned is that when the teachers were working on the teaching plans, the kids were responding. I'll talk, I think, a little bit about him tomorrow, but the green line, the communication, it really wasn't until the 3rd coaching session, between the 2nd and 3rd coaching sessions, she started to work on that skill. So you can see that it really went up once the teaching plan was being implemented. But anyway, then there were some dips there, and they often corresponded to breaks, Christmas break, spring break, and there was always that kind of catch-up that we had to do. But overall, he ended up getting a 1.5, meant that he exceeded expectations by the end. The goal attainment scale form, this is busy, but we have in our book on Compass and in an article, I don't have it up here, but we've talked in great detail about how we develop the goal attainment scales to measure outcomes. And first, what we do is we talk about what is the goal that we want the child to achieve here by the end of the school year. Where are they starting? And then we talk about what progress would look like. That's that -1, what a +1 would look like, and what a +2 would look like. And essentially, the way that we defined these increments in between the scores was based on these progress descriptions here. So it depends on, when you think about all the different kinds of goals we write, some might make sense based on frequency, some might make sense based on prompting. We want less prompting, more independence, or with peers and not with adults. So we had to think about how can we have a measurement system that made it equal in how we were measuring across the experimental and the control groups to see if Compass was really working. So the way that we would measure from -2, lowest performance, to highest performance, +2, if it was based on frequency, obviously we wanted the child to do it the highest, that would be a +2. Frequency of prompting, if it was the lowest, that would be a +2. Form of prompting, if the child's doing it with visual supports or independently, that would be a +2. Or able to do it in many unstructured contexts, or with peers, or with adults, with many adults, that would be progress. So just to give you an example, in this middle row here, this is his goal of imitating an adult play activity for 5 minutes. And the way that we scaled his goal was that if he made 50% more progress, so maybe he's not doing it for 5 minutes, but 7 or 8 minutes, that would be a +2. Or maybe he's doing it for 2 minutes, that's better than baseline, that would be a -1, that's progress. Or maybe he's doing it with 4 or 5 different objects, or 6 different objects. So these are ways that we can start to look at progress over time. And I've got some other examples here. I think I talked faster than I intended to get through all the slides. So I've got some other examples of how we've worked on Compass. And this next one is Will. And Will's concern, what came up in the consultation with his parent and his teacher was that he would get a lot of anxiety when there were schedule changes and become upset. And that would then either ruin the rest of the activity or sometimes the rest of the day for him. It was hard to get him back calm enough to participate. So you're going to start off, I think, listening to the consultant, and then I think as teacher and parent.
And you're difficulty calming himself down, so he just can't really calm down.
Yeah, when he doesn't understand the no, like if it's, I'm having trouble coming up with one, but like, okay, if he thinks it's a day that we're going on the bus and we're not going on the bus, say Wednesday bus, no bus. I want Wednesday bus. I mean, he just didn't understand, and it's like he perseverates on it because in his mind, that's what's supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. So again, it's really more a reaction to a change in his mind, even though it's not really a change. It's something different than what he's expecting.
And again, a lot of this is in the anxiety.
Yeah.
It just goes up. Okay.
But I think if you do the counting, because he loves to count. So, I mean, he will count to 100, 200, however long, you want him to count. He will do that. He enjoys that. So I think if we do a breathe and a count, and then say to himself, okay,
And then those times when he does manage it, then there's like a big, look what you did, real big reinforcement for that.
Okay, so we wanted him to be able to follow a relaxation routine when upset. And then be able to continue in his activity.
Music.
And good job.
No.
Yellow line. We'll count.
2, 3,
Count and blow.
3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10.
Are you calm?
Yes.
Hippo surprised everyone by saying,
7, 8, 9, 10.
Are you calm?
Yes. No.
cried Horace.
Then count and blow.
He gave his dad a big
5,
hug and asked him,
8, 9, 10.
Are you calm?
Yes.
Hippos.
This was kind of a tricky skill to work on because you don't want to set him up to get upset to show the consultant that he's making progress. So what the teachers did, and this was so much better in our second study compared to our first study, was we provided them all with one of those little flip Mino camcorders. And I don't even think they make these anymore. I think with iPhones and other ways to record, they aren't making them. But anyway, the teacher could have this in her back pocket, and then when the opportunity arose to work with him on his relaxation in real time, she could just record it for us. And so we actually used the videotape recordings when we came out to do the consultations, both face-to-face and web-based, which you'll see an example of the web-based in a second. And it was so nice because she didn't have to disrupt her normal day to create this teaching situation for us to observe, which is what we did in our first study. And if it was a goal with other peers, if the peer was sick, that didn't interfere because she was able to tape when the peer was there. So anyway, for lots of reasons, the videotaping was very useful. And we had lots of positive comments from the teachers, too, that they could use this to show the teaching assistants what they were working on, to show parents' progress, and to even help transfer information to a new teacher the next year. So in this next example, this is Luke, and Luke was higher functioning, very verbal child. And we were working on conversational turn-taking, and that was the goal. And in the conversation, what we learned was, first of all, does Luke even understand what a topic is? And so we needed to probably start there. So you're going to hear a conversation. This is a recording of a web-based session. So you'll see the consultants on the left, the teacher on the right, and then you'll see the teacher during coaching sessions working with him and teaching him just what is a conversation, and then we'll have another video of him doing it with a peer. Well, then you could first teach him what is a topic, and then you could say, okay, things I like, and then you can have, I like cars, and you can make two that he doesn't like, so he understands.
Right.
And it's clear what he likes. I like, spinach, I like.
Hummers.
Yeah. But then think about something.
Just staying on topic, okay?
Okay.
All right, so read your choices.
I like snakes. I like hummers. I like basketball.
Hey, Luke, what is your favorite car?
Hummers.
Good. Read the whole sentence.
I like hummers.
Good. Excellent. Okay, let's do the next one. So what was the topic here? The topic was
Favorite car.
favorite car. Good.
Let's try another one.
Yeah, let's try another one. Read each one.
I like cars. I like dogs. I like green.
Good. Luke, what is your favorite color?
Green.
Good. Read the whole sentence.
I like green.
Excellent. What is our topic?
Favorite color.
Favorite color. Good.
That's great.
Okay. All right, let's practice this one.
Yeah.
All right, so our topic is
Car.
cars. Hey, Luke, do you like cars?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you for looking at me when you answered.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
I like to look at cars.
Now look at me and say,
Do you like to look at cars?
can you ask me that question looking at me?
Yeah.
Look at Miss Gooden and say it.
Did you like to look at cars?
Yes, I do like to look at cars. I really think that cars are cool.
Yeah.
Do you think cars are cool?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay. So you could see he was really engaged in that. And really the teacher came up with all these activities, very creative. And then in the next video, this is him practicing with a peer.
Yeah. Hi, Luke. How are you? I am good. I am good. How are you? I am good. How was your spring break? Good. How was your spring break? Mine was good. I played outside a lot. What did you do? I went to Mama and Papa's.
Look at him, Luke.
What did you do at Mama and Papa's? I played. Did you go to Dad's house? Yes, I went this weekend. It looks like you had a good spring break, Luke. Yes, I did.
So, there was a lot of conversation between the consultant, between us and the teacher and the parent about, what is it about a conversation that we want him to be able to do? And, we might debate about eye contact. That really wasn't listed in the goal, but that was important to the teacher. But he definitely, you could see where this could be shaped to the next skill, which would be making it maybe less scripted and more natural, and building up on, the building blocks. So a little bit about what we've learned in our research. We have a very simple, what's called our Fidelity rating scale, and Fidelity means to what degree are the teaching plans implemented. And you can look at that in terms of, was it implemented or not, this one particular step of the teaching plan, or the quality of it. We just looked at, was it implemented or not. And overall, teachers, over 80% of the teaching plan components were implemented by the end of the school year. But what we found was when we correlated the quality of that fidelity of implementation, it didn't correlate with child outcomes until the very last final coaching session, which was around March or April at the end of the school year. Our school year is from August to May. So it took that long for teachers to implement all 3 teaching plans, and for us to see a correlation with child outcomes, which just reinforces what we already know, that consultation shouldn't be a one-time thing, and neither should coaching, that we've got to come in and we have to have the follow-up and provide that ongoing support to teachers. Also, what we found was that we wanted to look at, the lowest quartile, the children who didn't make as much progress, and what can we understand about those children compared to those who did so well. So we found that the children who didn't make much progress, by coaching session 2, which for us would have been by November, December, so we would have done the consultation like September, October, so within a couple of months, if teachers were implementing fewer than 50% of the components of the teaching plans, that predicted the child who was going to not do so well with the intervention, because those teachers never caught up. They stayed at that 50% level. So what we're learning is not only do we have to personalize our interventions to the child, but also to the teacher. And so those teachers might need something different, more hands-on support in the classroom with the implementation of teaching plans, maybe more frequent coaching. So this is something we'd love to look at in the future. I can say, I think, one more thing about this. I don't think I have a slide on this, but we were talking about, in the introduction about teacher burnout, and this is another thing that we found was the teachers who reported high burnout at the beginning of the year, those children made less progress. So if we're talking about implementation, research, and how to really, make services on a wide scale better, we've got to start looking at the adults, and supporting them who are working with the children. My colleague, Dr. Jennifer Grisham-Brown, she is an early childhood special educator and developed this coding framework that she's calling the common elements of teaching quality, because we have more than 24 evidence-based practices in autism, and in the U.S., that's what people are being taught, all these evidence-based practices. Unfortunately, what we're missing is the clinical decision-making, that one overlapping circles that I showed earlier. But we're thinking about, well, what are the key components of effective teaching or high-quality teaching? And we're right now analyzing our videotapes to see, if you look at this, it's kind of like starts off at the left, how the teacher sets up the occasion and responds to the child, how the child responds, and then what the consequences are. And it starts off with the child's engaged in activity that, relates to the skill that we're trying to teach. The teacher establishes the child's attention, and the teacher makes a request to the child in a format the child can understand, and the teacher waits for an appropriate time delay for the child to respond. And that's what we found the teachers had the most challenging time with, was overly cueing verbally, too much verbal cueing to allow the child time, because some of our children, they think, well, that's part of the teaching routine, so I'm going to wait till you cue me because that's just part of how I've been taught this. And so that's something that we've learned, and that the teachers actually watching their own videotapes actually made that point themselves. And then we look at how the child responds. If they do it accordingly, then what kind of reinforcement do we see? And if they aren't able to do it, then how does the teacher follow up? And what we found, just briefly, as we're starting to analyze this data, is we see the highest, we see that for the learning skills, the kind of structured teaching kind of activities, the teachers already started at a higher level. We didn't see as much of an increase from coaching 1 to coaching 4, but we really did for the communication skills and the social skills. So, in conclusion, I really got through this more quickly than I thought, so we'll have lots of time for questions. Our research is promising, but what we want to do is be able to replicate this with larger and different samples, and obviously different consultants. We are going to be revising and resubmitting a grant to look at the training. I actually teach as part of our autism certificate program, Compass as part of that. And it's been nice to work with special education teachers who are going back and getting this additional credential in autism, and where, what they've been able to take from the class, and also where some of our challenges are. So we've got some preliminary data that we can train others to do it, but so far it's been us doing the intervention. And consultation's not enough. I already talked about that we need follow-up. Data collection is often a challenge for teachers, and we need to make sure that it's data that's going to be useful and meaningful and going to help them with making decisions. And we have to have IEPs that are measurable. We have to have goals. Our IEPs are our individual education programs. And we really, that's especially for social and communication skills and learning skills. The academic skills, those are kind of easier to make measurable, even some of our OT skills. But some of the type of communication and social skills we're working on were kind of hard, and had to spend a lot of time making sure that they were measurable so that we can know if progress is being made. And I have several collaborators. Some of you might know Nancy Dalrymple. Nancy's kind of my hero. My sister was in her program back when I was 16, so I've known Nancy, gosh, more than 30 years. And she's still working with me, and the work with Compass actually originated from work she did years ago in trying to build capacity in the state of Indiana, really for adults, for providers who are working with adults with autism. And then John McGrew, one of my other collaborators, he has a 21-year-old with autism, so it's been great to have this wonderful team of researchers around, and obviously the parents and teachers. If we have school administrators who aren't interested in research, then we're never going to have new evidence-based practices. So I'm really appreciative when administrators allow us to contact teachers about the study. And obviously the parents who are most critical, lifelong advocates of the kids, who we need to do more studies on how we can really make Compass even that much more holistic, so that we're not just working on skills at school, but really looking at the whole child at home too. And that's a whole type of different study. So thank you very much for your time, and we have time for questions. Oh, that's a good question. So in the U.S., we have early childhood special education services. So for this child, I mean, it can vary, but for his classroom, it was actually for children who are receiving preschool services. Throughout the whole school year, that teacher might be getting more and more children with IEPs, but he has most of the students in that class did not have IEPs. They were typically developing students. Uh-huh. Any benefit to having an IEP without? Well, if we assume that our IEP is the roadmap, it's hard to know if we're headed in the right direction if we don't have a measurable outcome. That's how I think about it. Mm-hmm. No, we actually did those before we went out to the first coaching session, and we explained to the teacher how to do them. Now, the students that took my Compass course for the autism certificate, they actually were able to do the gases on their own once we explained it to them, and so they were which gives me confidence that this is something that, isn't super difficult. Any other questions? Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. It's yes, uh-huh. Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, that's the Compass process. I'm actually going to have some more video of him tomorrow with some of those other skills. I didn't really get back to the aggression with this. We were talking about imitation, but his aggression got much better. It reduced. That's one where we want frequency to go down, not up. But Oh, the Compass profile, those forms. It's in the book. It's in the book where you can copy them. I don't think they have the book here, but if anybody is interested, it's published through Springer, and it has it's written for the consultant. We're writing another book about developing an evidence-based IEP, but we're just in the midst now of putting that proposal together. For Compass, it's written for the consultant, but I still think that there's parts in there that could be helpful, like the profile, that would make sense, but it is kind of technical. The consultants? Well, so I'm a school psychologist, but my colleague Nancy is a special educator, and I just think that you need to have some training about what good consultation is, because we're not going in as experts, we're going in as facilitators, and we make that really clear up front. If we're going in telling people what to do, it's not going to work. We know that from other research and consultation in general. So I think that's important, is to know what good consultation is. And then just having a good understanding about autism. And I personally think the more that you've worked directly with kids, it's going to help with that clinical decision making as you're going through and setting your goals and your teaching plans. But those are all research questions we really don't know the answers to. Those are just my perceptions. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
So I just wondered about what you thought about that. Is there any movement in America where they're moving away from IEP? Or is that still
No. I mean, no. It's federal legislation to have an IEP. And I think parents would be up in arms because they feel like that's their one legal contract to ensure that their child's being focused on. But I think I understand, though, what you're saying about the mainstream classrooms. So the way that we did our studies was we focused on the special education teacher, because in the U.S., the special education teachers are responsible for the implementation of the IEPs. So we didn't work, the general education teachers were invited to the consultation, but not required to come. But I do think that we need to support those teachers more, the general education teachers. But the way that we reasoned it was that since the special education teacher is the consistent person who's legally responsible for the IEP, we're going to support her in the implementation in those general education classrooms. So Luke was in general ed full-time, Will was in general ed part-time, and then Joey was in that mix. It was an included program, but he also had other children with disabilities in there. So that's what we've done, is we're really focusing on the special ed teacher. And we're working on 3 goals, for 9 months. And I think part of it is where we prioritize things. And I think what worries me is the clinical decision-making about this particular child and what their need is and how that's going to set out if we don't have a specific plan for that. And what you're thinking about. But I understand that you're really trying to look at what's going to be feasible. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you.